One choice. One moment. One love story. Welcome to When He Chose Her. Enjoy the story. Don't go. The waitress whispered as thunder rolled across downtown Chicago. They're waiting outside. Nathaniel Crowe paused with one hand resting on the back of his chair, while the soft sound of jazz piano drifted through the restaurant like smoke. For a moment, he thought he had misheard her. People usually lowered their voices around him for very different reasons. They asked for favors, investment deals, photos, attention. But this woman standing beside his table with a coffee pot in one hand and quiet fear hidden behind calm blue eyes wasn't asking for anything. The restaurant glowed with warm amber light against the storm outside. Rain streaked down the tall windows facing Michigan Avenue, while expensive cars crawled through traffic below. Inside, silverware clinked softly against porcelain plates. A saxophone hummed near the bar. Everything felt polished, controlled, safe. Nathaniel glanced at the waitress again. She looked young, mid-20s maybe, blonde hair pinned loosely behind her neck. Black uniform pressed neatly despite the chaos of a Friday dinner rush. A silver name tag caught the light. Clara. Excuse me, he asked calmly. Clara leaned slightly closer without breaking eye contact. The man near the newspaper stand looked at the reflection in the window more than the actual street. Nathaniel frowned faintly. And he stopped pretending to read his newspaper the second you asked for the check. Her voice stayed low and steady. You shouldn't leave yet. Nathaniel almost smiled. Almost. What is this? He asked. A prank? TikTok's social experiment. Clara blinked once. No. Then maybe you've watched too many crime shows. Possible, she admitted softly. But crime shows usually have worse lighting. That caught him off guard. Just enough humor delivered completely dry. Nathaniel studied her more carefully now. Most people around him acted nervous or overly eager. Clara Whitmore looked neither. She looked focused. Outside, lightning flashed across the glass windows. Nathaniel casually turned toward the street. At first, he saw nothing unusual. A few pedestrians rushing through rain. Headlights reflecting off wet pavement. Steam rising from subway grates. Then he noticed the black SUV parked half a block away. Engine running. No hazard lights. No movement. You know, Nathaniel said slowly. If this is your way of getting a bigger tip, it's definitely original. Clara ignored the comment. Your driver disappeared 11 minutes ago. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Excuse me. Tall guy? Navy coat. Earpiece. He walked outside after taking a phone call. She glanced toward the front windows again. He never came back. Nathaniel reached for his phone instinctively. No messages. No missed calls. Strange. His driver, Warren, never left the car during pickups. Never. Clara refilled his water glass with precise movements. The bartender also got a call 5 minutes ago, she continued quietly. After that, he looked at your table 3 times. Nathaniel followed her gaze toward the bar. The bartender quickly looked away. A small chill moved down his spine despite the warmth of the restaurant. Still, suspicion came naturally to men like Nathaniel Crowe. Billionaires survived because they trusted patterns, not strangers. Especially not strangers with observant eyes and waitress uniforms. Let me guess, he said coolly. You want me to sneak out through the kitchen while you save my life? Clara finally looked annoyed. Honestly, I was hoping you'd just sit down for another 10 minutes. The piano music shifted softly. Somewhere behind them, someone laughed too loudly near the wine wall. Nathaniel glanced again toward the SUV outside. Still there. Rain hammered harder against the windows now. Mr. Crowe. Clara's voice dropped lower. I know this sounds crazy. A little. But people who are nervous look around too much. She nodded subtly toward the street corner. Those men barely move at all. Nathaniel followed her eyes again. Near the newspaper stand stood a man in a gray jacket, holding an umbrella. Motionless. Watching the restaurant entrance without appearing to. Nathaniel felt something unpleasant settle quietly in his chest. Not fear exactly. Instinct. The kind that had helped him build a $7 billion empire by knowing when a room changed before anyone else noticed. Clara stepped back as another server rushed past carrying steaks on black iron trays. For half a second, the moment almost broke. The restaurant noise returned. The illusion of normal life tried to smooth itself over again. Then Nathaniel's phone buzzed. Warren. Finally. Nathaniel answered immediately. Where are you? Silence. Then static. Then the line disconnected. Clara watched his expression carefully. Still think I'm crazy? She asked softly. Nathaniel stared at the dark screen in his hand while thunder shook the windows above Chicago. Outside, the black SUV's headlights suddenly switched on. Nathaniel slowly lowered his phone onto the white tablecloth while the headlights outside cut through the rain like pale knives across the street. The disconnected call sat heavily in his chest. Warren never lost signal. Warren never panicked. And Warren definitely never hung up first. Clara reached for the leather check holder near his plate and closed it quietly before anyone nearby noticed the tension building at table 12. You should stay seated, she said. Nathaniel looked up at her carefully now. Really looked. Her expression had not changed once since this started. No drama. No shaking hands. Just calm observation. That unsettled him more than fear would have. You realize how insane this sounds, right? He asked quietly. A billionaire trapped in a jazz restaurant because a waitress noticed a suspicious umbrella? Clara tilted her head slightly. When you say it like that, yes. Nathaniel almost laughed despite himself. Almost. The pianist near the bar shifted into a slower melody while candlelight flickered softly against dark wood walls. Around them, wealthy couples continued eating expensive dinners completely unaware that Nathaniel Crow's pulse had started climbing for the first time in months. He built companies during market collapses, negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking. But uncertainty was different when it felt personal. Clara glanced toward the front windows again. The SUV moved closer. Nathaniel turned slightly. She was right. The black vehicle now sat directly across from the restaurant entrance with its headlights still running through sheets of rain. Maybe someone is waiting for a pickup, he said, though his voice carried less confidence this time. Clara looked at him evenly. Then why did the driver kill the windshield wipers? Nathaniel froze for half a second. Outside, rain hammered against the glass, but the SUV's wipers had indeed stopped moving. Strange. Small. Wrong. A server passed nearby balancing martinis on a silver tray while laughter drifted from a birthday table near the piano. The normalcy of the room suddenly felt fragile, like thin ice over dark water. Nathaniel leaned back slowly in his chair. Suppose I believe you for 1 minute, he said quietly. What exactly do you think is happening? Clara folded her arms loosely. I think someone is waiting for you to walk outside. That narrows it down to about half of Manhattan. Chicago, she corrected calmly. And no, not business rivals. How would you know? Because professionals who want money usually stay invisible. Her eyes moved briefly toward the window again. These men want you nervous. Nathaniel studied her face carefully. Intelligent eyes. Sharp attention to detail. Too sharp for someone pouring coffee in a jazz restaurant on a Friday night. Who are you? He asked. Clara gave a faint shrug. Right now? Very underpaid. Another tiny spark of humor. Dry? Unexpected. Nathaniel exhaled slowly through his nose. You do realize I employ former federal agents, right? And where are they? She asked softly. That landed harder than he expected. Nathaniel reached for his phone again and dialed Warren a second time. Straight to voicemail. His jaw tightened. Clara noticed immediately. You are starting to believe me now. I am starting to believe something is wrong. That is usually how bad nights begin. Nathaniel stared at her for another long moment before standing from his chair. Clara's expression sharpened instantly. What are you doing? Testing your theory. Before she could answer, Nathaniel lifted one hand toward the entrance where his head of security, Daniel Mercer, stood near the hostess station scanning. The dining room. Tall. Broad shoulders. Former Marine. Nathaniel trusted him more than almost anyone. Daniel immediately approached the table. Sir. Nathaniel kept his voice casual. Take the front exit. Circle the block and call me when you reach the car. Clara's eyes widened slightly. That is not smart. Nathaniel ignored her. Daniel frowned faintly, but nodded once. Understood. As Daniel turned toward the entrance, Clara stepped closer to Nathaniel's chair. If something happens, you are going to feel very stupid for not listening to the waitress sooner. Nathaniel folded his arms. And if nothing happens? Clara picked up his untouched bourbon glass and slid it gently closer to him. Then you get a funny story about the paranoid blonde who interrupted your dinner. The rain intensified outside. Thunder rolled low across the city skyline. Near the piano, someone dropped a fork. Tiny sounds suddenly felt painfully loud. Daniel pushed through the restaurant doors and disappeared into the storm. Clara watched the windows without blinking. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Nathaniel checked his watch. 30 seconds later, headlights exploded across the front windows as a dark sedan accelerated hard near the curb outside. Tires screeched against wet pavement. Several diners gasped. A woman near the bar stood suddenly. Then silence crashed back over the room almost instantly. Nathaniel's heart kicked once against his ribs. The restaurant doors burst open again. Daniel stepped inside, soaked with rain, breathing harder than before. "Sir," he said sharply. A black sedan tried to pin me against the curb. Clara slowly looked up at Nathaniel over the rim of his bourbon glass. "Now," she said quietly, "do you believe me?" For several long seconds, nobody inside the restaurant moved. The jazz piano had stopped completely now. Rain drummed against the tall windows while Daniel Mercer stood near the entrance with water dripping from the shoulders of his dark coat onto the marble floor. His breathing remained controlled, but Nathaniel noticed the tension in his jaw immediately. Daniel did not scare easily. "Tell me exactly what happened," Nathaniel said quietly. Daniel glanced once around the dining room before stepping closer to the table. Black sedan came from the east side of the block. Fast. He lowered his voice further. It angled toward the curb the second I stepped outside. Clara remained standing beside Nathaniel's chair with unnatural calm. "What color sedan?" she asked. Daniel blinked once, surprised she was speaking at all. "Dark gray. Tinted windows." Clara nodded faintly to herself. "Same car that passed twice during the dinner rush." Nathaniel turned toward her sharply. "You noticed that too?" "I notice everything," she replied. The room slowly returned to life around them. Diners resumed conversations in uncertain murmurs while waiters exchanged nervous glances near the kitchen doors. Somewhere near the back bar, a wine glass shattered accidentally and made several people jump. Nathaniel watched Clara carefully now. Her eyes kept moving. Window, entrance, hallway mirror, street reflection. She was tracking the entire room without appearing obvious about it. "Who taught you to observe people like this?" he asked quietly. Clara picked up empty plates from the table beside his with practiced efficiency. "Anxiety," she answered dryly. Nathaniel stared at her for a second before a reluctant smile almost appeared. "That was supposed to be funny?" "A little." Daniel crossed his arms. "Sir, we should leave through the service entrance and relocate immediately." Clara shook her head before Nathaniel could answer. "No." Daniel looked at her flatly. "Excuse me." If they expected him to leave through the front, Clara said calmly, they already considered the back exit too. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "And you know this because?" Clara met his stare without flinching. "Because smart people plan for predictable decisions." Nathaniel noticed something interesting then. Daniel, a man trained to intimidate rooms without raising his voice, could not unsettle her at all. That alone made Clara more dangerous than she appeared. Nathaniel loosened the cuff of his black suit jacket slowly. "Suppose I ask the obvious question," he said. "Why are you helping me?" Clara glanced toward the rain outside again before answering. "Because everyone else ignored what was happening." "That is not an answer. It is the only one you are getting right now." Nathaniel should have been irritated. Normally, he hated mysteries he could not control. Yet something about Clara Whitmore felt strangely grounded beneath all this tension. Real. She was not impressed by his money, not intimidated by his reputation. If anything, she looked mildly annoyed he kept arguing with her. Daniel stepped closer to Nathaniel. "Sir, local security teams can be here within 6 minutes." Clara immediately shook her head again. "Too slow." Daniel exhaled sharply. "You keep saying things like you know what you are talking about." Clara looked at him evenly. "I do know what I am talking about." Silence settled briefly over the table. Nathaniel noticed the slight shift in her expression after she said it. Not arrogance. Memory. Something darker hiding underneath the calm surface. Before he could ask more, the bartender suddenly approached them looking pale. "Mr. Crow?" Nathaniel turned. "Yes." The bartender hesitated awkwardly. "There is a man outside asking if you already left." Daniel's posture changed instantly. "Describe him." "Tall. Gray jacket. Umbrella." Clara closed her eyes briefly. "Newspaper stand," she murmured. Nathaniel felt the atmosphere tighten around the room again, like invisible wires pulling too hard. "What did you tell him?" Daniel asked sharply. "That I did not know." "Did he believe you?" The bartender swallowed nervously. "I honestly cannot tell." Clara reached for Nathaniel's untouched bourbon again and slid it farther away this time. You should not drink anything right now. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. You think somebody poisoned the bourbon too? No, she said calmly. I think your judgment is already impaired enough. Daniel coughed suddenly to hide what sounded suspiciously like laughter. Nathaniel looked at both of them in disbelief. Amazing, he muttered. I almost get run over tonight, and somehow I am still being insulted. You are surviving this in the most billionaire way possible, Clara replied. Nathaniel actually laughed once then. Quiet, brief, unexpected, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Clara's expression softened slightly. Just slightly. Then her attention snapped back toward the windows again. The black SUV outside had moved closer. Much closer. Now it sat directly across from the restaurant doors with headlights glowing pale through the rainstorm. Nathaniel felt his stomach tighten instinctively. Clara stared at the vehicle for 2 long seconds before speaking very quietly. They know you are still inside. Daniel immediately reached beneath his coat toward the radio clipped near his shoulder. Static answered him. Nothing else. His face darkened. Communication is down, he said. Nathaniel slowly stood from his chair. All right, he said calmly, though tension edged his voice now. Nobody leaves alone. Nobody uses the front entrance. And somebody finally tells me why a waitress seems more prepared for this than my own security team. Clara looked up at him under the warm restaurant lights while thunder rolled over Chicago again. Because, she said softly, I grew up around men who watched doors the same way those men do. The storm outside grew louder, as if the city itself was warning them to disappear before midnight. Rain blurred the skyline beyond the restaurant windows while headlights smeared across wet streets like moving ghosts. Nathaniel Crowe stood motionless beside table 12, staring at Clara Whitmore with growing disbelief. What exactly does that mean? He asked quietly. Clara lowered her eyes for half a second before answering. It means I spent most of my childhood around detectives, informants, and people who lied for a living. Daniel Mercer folded his arms tighter. You were law enforcement? Clara gave a faint shake of her head. No, my father was. Nathaniel watched her carefully. Her comm had cracks now. Small ones. Barely visible unless someone knew where to look. And, he pressed gently. Clara hesitated before speaking again. He investigated organized financial crimes in Chicago 15 years ago. Corruption. Shell companies. Missing money. Thunder rolled across the city. One night, Clara continued softly. He told my mother we needed to leave town for a while. Before I was 12, my father taught me how to notice exits, hands, shoes, and lies before people even opened their mouths. Her eyes drifted toward the rain beyond the windows. 3 days later, somebody forced his car off Lakeshore Drive. Silence settled heavily around the table. Even Daniel stopped questioning her after that. Nathaniel felt something shift quietly inside him. Until now, Clara had been a strange interruption in his evening. Intelligent, suspiciously observant. But suddenly she felt human in a way he had not expected. Not mysterious anymore. Haunted. Clara straightened slightly, as though regretting she had said too much. Anyway, she added dryly, family trauma apparently makes people very detail-oriented. Nathaniel almost smiled again despite the tension surrounding them. She had an odd way of making painful things sound almost casual. You think tonight is connected to something organized? Daniel asked carefully. Clara nodded once. Too coordinated not to be. Nathaniel loosened his tie slowly while processing everything. Outside, the black SUV remained parked directly across from the restaurant entrance. Waiting. Patient. Wrong. If somebody wanted me dead, Nathaniel said quietly, there are easier ways. Clara looked at him directly. This is not about killing you. Then what is it about? Pressure. Her answer came immediately. Whoever is outside wants you scared enough to make a mistake. Nathaniel's jaw tightened faintly. That landed uncomfortably close to the truth. Tomorrow morning, he was scheduled to finalize a massive defense technology merger worth nearly $4 billion. Only 6 executives in the country even knew the deal existed. Daniel glanced toward him immediately, reading the shift in his expression. Sir. Nathaniel ignored him for a second. Clara noticed. Of course she noticed. There is something important happening tomorrow, she said softly. Not a question. Nathaniel stared at her in silence. You are terrifyingly observant, he muttered. Clara shrugged lightly. You started checking your watch every 2 minutes after I mentioned pressure. Daniel stepped closer immediately. Sir, If this concerns the Lockridge merger, Nathaniel cut him off with one sharp glance. Clara raised an eyebrow slightly. Lockridge merger, she repeated quietly. That sounds expensive. Nathaniel exhaled through his nose. You really should have become a detective. I tried. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Nathaniel looked at her. What happened? Clara gave a small, humorless smile. Turns out tuition is very rude about wanting money. Before Nathaniel could answer, every light inside the restaurant flickered once, then twice. Several diners gasped softly. The pianist stopped playing altogether. For one brief second, the entire restaurant fell into near darkness except for flashes of lightning outside. Then the backup lights kicked in, dimmer than before. Daniel immediately moved closer to Nathaniel. We need to move now. Clara nodded instantly. Agreed. Nathaniel looked between them. You two suddenly agreeing is honestly making this much worse. Clara ignored him and grabbed her coat from beneath the service counter near the kitchen hallway. There is an alley behind the loading dock, she said while pulling the coat over her uniform. Most people do not know it connects to Lower Wabash through an underground parking structure. Daniel frowned. How do you know that? Because employees smoke there when management annoys them. Nathaniel blinked once. That is somehow the most normal thing you have said tonight. A faint smile touched Clara's mouth for the first time. Small, brief, real. It vanished almost immediately. We cannot use your usual cars, she continued. Too obvious. Daniel reached for his phone again. Still no signal. Communications are dead. Clara nodded toward the kitchen hallway. The old freight elevator in the basement still works during outages. It runs on a separate generator. Nathaniel stared at her. You know this building better than my security team. I know where the rats hide, Clara answered calmly. Rich people usually do not. Daniel muttered something under his breath that sounded dangerously close to agreement. Another crack of thunder shook the windows. Outside, two figures now stood beneath umbrellas near the SUV, watching the restaurant doors without pretending otherwise anymore. Nathaniel saw them too. His expression darkened instantly. Clara stepped closer beside him, lowering her voice. You still have time to disappear quietly. Nathaniel looked at her carefully. And what happens to you after I leave? Clara hesitated just long enough for him to notice. I will figure something out. Nathaniel studied her face under the dim amber lights while rain washed down the windows behind them. Then, for reasons he could not fully explain yet, he made a decision that surprised even himself. No, he said quietly. Clara frowned slightly. No. Nathaniel reached for his coat beside the chair. If someone is hunting me tonight, he said calmly, then I would rather stay close to the only person in this city who noticed before it was too late. The basement corridor smelled faintly of detergent, old brick, and burnt coffee as Clara led Nathaniel and Daniel through the narrow employee hallway beneath the restaurant. Overhead lights buzzed softly while pipes rattled every few seconds from the storm above them. Somewhere far upstairs, muffled jazz music still drifted through the ceiling like a memory from another life. Clara moved quickly but never rushed. That was the first thing Nathaniel noticed. Most people panicked loudly when danger appeared. Clara became quieter, sharper, more precise. She pushed open a heavy metal door marked staff only and motioned them toward a dim freight elevator at the end of the corridor. Please tell me this thing passed inspection sometime this century, Nathaniel muttered while eyeing the ancient steel doors. Clara pressed the call button once. Confidence is important during emergencies. That is not an answer. No, she admitted. It is not. Daniel almost smiled for the first time all night. The elevator groaned somewhere below them before slowly rising upward. Nathaniel loosened his coat while studying Clara again under the pale basement lights. Her black waitress uniform looked strangely out of place against the tension surrounding them now. She did not seem fragile anymore. She seemed prepared. How long have you worked at the restaurant? He asked. Quietly. 2 years. And before that? Clara crossed her arms lightly against the cold. A bookstore. Nathaniel blinked once. That feels aggressively normal compared to the rest of tonight. People are complicated. The elevator doors opened with a loud metallic shudder. Inside, the lighting flickered weakly above an empty cargo platform scratched by decades of deliveries. Clara stepped in first. Daniel followed immediately, scanning corners automatically. Nathaniel entered last. The elevator lurched downward hard enough to make him grab the rail instinctively. Clara noticed. You hate elevators, she observed. Nathaniel straightened immediately. I do not hate elevators. You grabbed the rail before the floor moved. That proves survival instinct. That proves billionaire instincts are surprisingly delicate. Nathaniel stared at her for half a second before laughing quietly despite himself. The sound surprised all three of them. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to him without caution wrapped around every word. The elevator rattled lower into the building while rain hammered faintly somewhere beyond the concrete walls. Daniel checked his phone again. Still dead. No signal anywhere, he muttered. Clara nodded once. Parking structure walls block reception. Nathaniel frowned. You really know this place too well. Clara leaned lightly against the elevator wall. When you work double shifts long enough, you start noticing escape routes. The elevator doors finally opened into a massive underground loading garage lined with old maintenance vehicles and flickering fluorescent lights. Water dripped steadily from exposed pipes overhead. The air smelled cold and metallic. Clara stepped carefully across the concrete floor toward a narrow side passage. This way. Nathaniel followed beside her now instead of behind. Daniel stayed several feet back, watching every shadow. You realize, Nathaniel said quietly, that I still do not fully trust you. Clara looked sideways at him. That makes two of us. You think I am dangerous? I think men with private jets usually are. Nathaniel adjusted the collar of his coat against the cold underground air. I own 4 jets. Clara nodded thoughtfully. See? That is exactly the kind of sentence normal people never say. Nathaniel shook his head once, almost amused. You really do not care who I am, do you? Clara stopped walking briefly beneath a flickering overhead light. My father used to say money only changes how loudly people lie. Her voice softened slightly. I stopped being impressed by rich men a long time ago. Something about the sadness hidden underneath those words lingered with Nathaniel longer than he expected. Before he could answer, Daniel suddenly raised one hand sharply. Everyone froze. Somewhere deeper in the garage came the faint sound of tires rolling slowly across wet concrete. Not close, but close enough. Clara's expression changed instantly. Focused again. They found the garage entrance. Daniel moved beside Nathaniel immediately. We need another exit. Clara pointed toward a dark maintenance stairwell near the far wall. That stairwell connects to Lower Wabash. Nathaniel glanced toward the distant headlights moving faintly through the garage shadows. How many people are after me tonight exactly? Clara started moving again quickly. Enough that somebody spent real money planning this. They hurried toward the stairwell while the distant vehicle noise echoed louder through the structure. Nathaniel noticed Clara glance behind them every few seconds, counting sounds instead of footsteps. She looked less like a waitress now and more like someone who had survived fear before. They reached the stairwell door just as another flash of headlights swept across the garage columns behind them. Daniel pulled the heavy metal door open. Cold wind rushed downward from the street level above, carrying rain and the distant sound of police sirens somewhere across the city. Clara climbed the stairs first 2 at a time. Nathaniel followed close behind her. The narrow stairwell echoed with footsteps and thunder while emergency lights glowed faint red along concrete walls. Halfway up, Nathaniel finally spoke the question that had been building in his chest all night. Why are you really helping me, Clara? She slowed for only a second before answering quietly, without turning around. Because nobody warned my father either. By the time they reached street level, the storm had swallowed most of downtown Chicago in silver rain and blurred lights. Wind whipped between the buildings hard enough to shake the metal stairwell door behind them as Clara stepped into the alley first. The city looked different after midnight. Colder, quieter, more dangerous. Neon reflections trembled across puddles while distant sirens echoed somewhere near the river. Nathaniel pulled his coat tighter against the freezing rain and glanced behind them instinctively. Where now? He asked. Clara scanned the street quickly before pointing toward an elevated train station 3 blocks away. Too many cameras on the main roads. We stay unpredictable. Daniel frowned immediately. Sir, with respect, hiding in public transportation is not exactly ideal. Clara kept walking without slowing down. Neither is getting followed in a luxury SUV. Nathaniel noticed something then. Daniel argued with Clara constantly, but he still followed every direction she gave. Somewhere beneath all the skepticism, his instincts trusted her too. They moved quickly through narrow side streets while the city thundered around them. Clara stayed slightly ahead, eyes moving across reflections, parked cars, and storefront windows. Nathaniel followed close enough to notice details now. She limped very slightly on her left foot when tired. Her hands stayed tucked into her coat sleeves whenever she was thinking. And every time thunder cracked overhead, her shoulders stiffened for just a second before relaxing again. Trauma, Nathaniel realized quietly. Not fear. Memory. They reached the elevated station just as a train roared overhead, shaking water loose from rusted steel beams. The platform was nearly empty except for one exhausted janitor drinking coffee near the vending machines. Clara finally slowed beneath the flickering station lights. We wait here for a few minutes. Daniel checked the street below carefully. If somebody tracks us here, then at least there are witnesses, Clara replied softly. Nathaniel leaned against a steel support beam while rain hissed across the tracks nearby. For the first time all night, the adrenaline had enough space to let exhaustion creep in around the edges. You know, he said quietly to Clara, most women would have gone home hours ago. Clara looked at him sideways. Most billionaires would have ignored the waitress. Fair point. Nathaniel rubbed one hand across his jaw slowly. What happened after your father died? Clara stared down at the wet train tracks below. My mother stopped sleeping. Her voice remained calm, but softer now. And I learned how quickly people disappear once they become inconvenient. Nathaniel watched her carefully beneath the pale station lights. That is a heavy lesson at a young age. Clara gave a faint shrug. Chicago offers free emotional damage with residency. Nathaniel laughed quietly again before he could stop himself. She really did that somehow. Pulled humor out of darkness like it belonged there naturally. Daniel suddenly stiffened near the staircase entrance. Company. Nathaniel immediately straightened. A man in a dark raincoat had entered the station below and stopped near the ticket machines. He was not looking at them directly. That somehow made it worse. Clara watched him carefully through the reflection in the station glass instead of turning around. Do not stare, she murmured. He already knows we are here. Nathaniel lowered his voice. You know him? No, Clara's expression sharpened slightly. But he is wearing the same shoes as the man outside the restaurant. Nathaniel blinked. You identified somebody by shoes? Clara looked at him calmly. Expensive Italian leather. Dark brown stitching. Limited edition. She paused. Rich people really do love announcing themselves through their shoes. Even Daniel looked impressed now. The man downstairs touched his ear briefly before walking back toward the station exit. Clara immediately stepped away from the platform edge. We move now. Where? Nathaniel asked. Clara looked toward a glowing 24-hour diner across the street below. Somewhere loud. They hurried down the station stairs and crossed through rain toward the diner while traffic sprayed water across the sidewalks beside them. Neon lights buzzed faintly above fogged windows as they stepped inside the tiny restaurant moments later. Warm air wrapped around them instantly along with the smell of bacon, burnt coffee, and fresh pancakes. The waitress behind the counter barely looked up from her magazine. A tired truck driver slept in the far booth beneath an old Cubs poster. It was probably the safest place Nathaniel Crow had ever seen. Clara slid into a booth near the back wall, where she could see both exits. Nathaniel sat across from her, while Daniel remained standing nearby, scanning the windows. An elderly waitress approached, holding 3 menus. Coffee, she asked. Clara nodded immediately. Please. Nathaniel looked at Clara in disbelief. You stop running for your life and immediately order coffee? Clara reached for sugar packets absent-mindedly. I work in food service. Caffeine is medically necessary. The elderly waitress returned a minute later carrying steaming mugs. As she set them down, Clara suddenly froze. Nathaniel noticed it instantly. What? He asked quietly. Clara stared toward the waitress's pocket where a gold lighter peeked out beside her order pad. A tiny silver logo reflected under the diner lights. Nathaniel saw Clara's face lose color for the first time all night. Clara. She looked up slowly, eyes sharp with realization now. That logo, she whispered. I saw it tonight. Daniel stepped closer immediately. Where? Clara swallowed once. On the man outside the restaurant. Nathaniel felt cold settle into his chest again despite the warm diner air. Clara looked toward him carefully now, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel, she said quietly, I do not think random people are behind this anymore. The tiny diner suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too exposed. Rain streaked down the windows while neon lights buzzed faintly above the counter, But Nathaniel Crowe barely noticed any of it anymore. His attention stayed fixed on Clara Whitmore's face. She had gone completely still. "What logo?" Daniel asked quietly. Clara looked toward the elderly waitress near the coffee machine again before lowering her voice. "A silver falcon." Nathaniel frowned. "Slightly. That means something to you." Clara nodded once without taking her eyes off the counter. "My father kept files on a private consulting firm years ago. Security contractors. Financial recoveries. Political pressure." Her expression darkened. People disappeared around them. Daniel's posture changed instantly. "Name?" Clara finally looked back at him. "Argent Global." Nathaniel felt something cold settle hard in his chest. He knew that name too well. Daniel noticed immediately. "Sir." Nathaniel leaned back slowly in the booth. "Argent Global handled overseas logistics for Lockridge Defense 3 years ago." Clara stared at him. "The merger company?" Nathaniel nodded once. "Their executives denied any current connections." Clara gave a humorless little laugh. "People with money always deny current connections." The old waitress walked past again, refilling coffee cups while humming softly to herself, completely unaware of the tension gathering in the back booth. Nathaniel lowered his voice carefully. "If Argent is involved, then this is bigger than intimidation." Daniel nodded grimly. "Agreed." Clara wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, though Nathaniel noticed she still was not drinking it. "Somebody wants control over tomorrow's deal," she murmured. "Or they want to stop it entirely." Nathaniel stared out through the rain-covered diner windows while his mind moved rapidly through possibilities. Executives, investors, competitors, lawyers, hundreds of millions of dollars balanced on signatures waiting for sunrise. Then one thought surfaced quietly above all the others. "There are only 6 people who know the full details of the merger," he said carefully. Daniel looked at him immediately. "You think there is a leak inside the company?" "I think somebody tonight knew exactly where I would be." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly, meaning this started long before the restaurant. Silence settled heavily around the booth again. Outside, headlights drifted slowly through rain across the empty street. Nathaniel rubbed one hand across his jaw while exhaustion pressed harder against him now. It was nearly 1 in the morning. 12 hours earlier he had been worried about shareholder negotiations and stock movement. Now he was hiding in a 24-hour diner with a waitress who noticed assassination patterns through shoe leather and cigarette lighters. Life changed quickly sometimes. Clara suddenly looked toward the diner entrance. "Do not react," she said softly. Nathaniel immediately felt his pulse tighten. A man wearing a gray hoodie had entered the diner, carrying an umbrella dripping rainwater onto the tile floor. He moved casually toward the counter without looking directly at them once. That somehow made Clara more nervous. "He followed us from the station," she whispered. Daniel shifted slightly beside the booth. "Positive?" Clara nodded faintly. "Same umbrella. Same walk." Nathaniel glanced toward the man subtly. Mid-40s maybe. Calm posture. Baseball cap low over his eyes. Ordinary enough to disappear anywhere. Which probably meant he was dangerous. The man ordered coffee quietly before taking a stool near the window facing the street. Watching reflections instead of people. Clara immediately noticed that too. "Professional," she murmured. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We should move." Nathaniel looked toward Clara. "Suggestions?" She thought for half a second only. "We need somewhere crowded for another hour." "Like where?" Clara glanced through the rain outside toward glowing lights across the street. "Laundromat." Nathaniel blinked. "I am sorry. Did you just say laundromat?" "Nobody expects billionaires to hide beside industrial dryers." Daniel muttered quietly. "She is not wrong." Nathaniel stared at both of them in disbelief. Tonight officially stopped making sense around the freight elevator. Clara finally took a sip of coffee. Adaptability is attractive in stressful situations. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow slowly. Was that flirting? Clara nearly choked on the coffee. Daniel looked away immediately, pretending sudden interest in the napkin dispenser. Clara recovered quickly, though faint color touched her cheeks for the first time all night. "No," she said calmly. "That was sarcasm." Nathaniel smiled slightly into his coffee mug. "Shame. I was starting to feel special." Clara rolled her eyes. Softly, but Nathaniel noticed the tension in her shoulders eased just a little afterward. Strange. Even with danger circling them through the city, moments around Clara somehow felt warmer than they should. Reeler, the man at the counter, suddenly stood to leave. Clara watched his reflection in the diner glass carefully. He just texted someone. Daniel immediately stepped closer. We move now. Nathaniel threw several bills onto the table and stood beside Clara. The storm outside had weakened slightly now, but downtown Chicago still glowed cold and silver beneath the midnight rain. Clara pulled her coat tighter as they hurried toward the laundromat across the street. Neon signs buzzed overhead, while passing cars sprayed water across the sidewalks. Halfway across the intersection, Nathaniel suddenly stopped walking. Clara turned immediately. What? Nathaniel stared toward the diner windows behind them, where the man in the gray hoodie now stood speaking quietly into an earpiece. Then Nathaniel noticed something else. A familiar black sedan slowly turning the corner at the far end of the block. His stomach dropped instantly. They already knew where we were going, he said quietly. Clara followed his gaze toward the approaching headlights. Her expression changed immediately. Run! Rain exploded across the sidewalk as Clara grabbed Nathaniel's sleeve and pulled him hard toward the narrow alley beside the laundromat. Behind them, headlights swept across the wet intersection while the black sedan accelerated through the turn too smoothly to be accidental. Daniel stayed close behind, one hand pressed near the concealed radio beneath his coat, even though communications were still dead. The city around them blurred into silver reflections and sirens as they ran deeper into downtown Chicago. Clara's breathing stayed controlled despite the cold air burning around them. Nathaniel noticed that immediately. She moved like someone who had practiced staying calm during panic for years. Left, Clara said sharply as they reached the alley exit. Nathaniel followed without hesitation now. Strange how quickly trust formed when survival demanded it. They crossed through a nearly empty parking structure entrance and slipped inside, just as the sedan rolled slowly past the alley mouth outside. Clara pressed herself briefly against the concrete wall, listening instead of looking. Nathaniel stood inches away from her now, close enough to see raindrops trembling against her eyelashes beneath the harsh fluorescent garage lights. How are you doing this? He asked quietly between breaths. Clara kept listening toward the street outside. Doing what? Staying calm. Clara finally looked at him. I am not calm. Her voice softened slightly. I am just used to pretending. Something about the honesty in that answer settled heavily inside Nathaniel's chest. Before he could respond, Daniel suddenly motioned toward the upper garage levels. We cannot stay here. Clara nodded immediately. Too many exits. Too exposed. Nathaniel glanced toward the rain outside. Suggestions? Clara pointed toward a narrow stairwell near the elevators. Roof access. Daniel frowned. That traps us. No, Clara replied quietly. It gives us visibility. Nathaniel followed her toward the stairwell without arguing now. Somewhere during the last few hours, the waitress from table 12 had quietly become the smartest person in every room they entered. They climbed 6 flights while thunder rattled through the concrete structure around them. Nathaniel's expensive shoes slipped once on the wet stairs and Clara caught his arm instinctively before he lost balance. Careful, she murmured. Nathaniel looked down at her hand, still gripping his sleeve. Warm despite the cold. Steady despite everything. Clara released him quickly, almost embarrassed by the contact. Your Billionaire shoes are not designed for cardio. Nathaniel laughed softly under his breath. You know, most people would be more supportive during a life-threatening chase. I gave up emotional customer service after midnight. Even Daniel shook his head faintly behind them like he could not believe these conversations were happening right now. They finally reached the rooftop level where freezing wind slammed against them immediately. The storm had weakened into steady rain now, but downtown Chicago still glowed. Beneath heavy clouds and reflected neon, Clara moved toward the edge carefully, scanning the streets below. Nathaniel joined her beside the concrete barrier. Far below, the black sedan sat parked near the garage entrance. Waiting. They know we are here, Daniel said grimly. Clara nodded once. But they lost visual confirmation. Nathaniel stared down at the city lights below while his mind raced through names. Executives. Investors. Partners. Someone close enough to predict his movements hours ahead of time. Someone connected to Argent Global. Then suddenly another name surfaced. One that made his stomach tighten instantly. Owen Mercer, his chief financial officer. Nathaniel turned sharply toward Daniel. How long has your brother worked security consulting? Daniel froze. Just slightly. But Clara noticed immediately. Of course she did. What? Daniel asked carefully. Nathaniel studied him hard now. Owen Mercer introduced Argent Global during Lockridge negotiations last year. Rain whipped across the rooftop between them. Daniel's face slowly lost color. Sir, my brother handles corporate compliance, not field operations. Clara stepped closer quietly. But he would know your schedule. Daniel looked toward her sharply. You think my brother is involved in this? Clara held his gaze calmly. I think somebody close to Nathaniel sold information. Silence crashed across the rooftop harder than thunder. Nathaniel watched Daniel carefully. Trusted employee. Loyal for years. But loyalty looked fragile tonight. Daniel slowly removed his earpiece and stared at it for a long moment. My brother called me 3 times before dinner, he admitted quietly. He kept asking whether the merger meeting was still happening tomorrow morning. Nathaniel felt cold anger settle deep inside him. Clara saw it immediately. Do not spiral yet, she said softly. People panic when money disappears. That does not automatically make them guilty. Nathaniel looked at her. You always this reasonable during disasters? Clara shrugged lightly beneath the rain. Trauma builds character. Then suddenly headlights flashed across the rooftop entrance behind them. Clara's expression changed. Instantly. Down. She grabbed Nathaniel's arm and pulled him behind a concrete ventilation wall just as another vehicle rolled slowly onto the rooftop level. Daniel crouched beside them immediately. The black sedan stopped 20 yards away with its engine idling softly beneath the rain. Nobody exited the car. That somehow felt worse. Clara's breathing stayed quiet beside Nathaniel while thunder rolled low over the skyline. Nathaniel glanced toward her in the darkness between flashes of lightning. You know, he whispered carefully, this may officially qualify as the worst first date in Chicago history. Clara looked at him in disbelief for half a second before a quiet laugh escaped her despite everything. Soft, real, beautiful enough to make Nathaniel forget the storm entirely for one dangerous moment. Then the sedan doors slowly opened. Rain swept across the rooftop in silver waves as the sedan doors opened beneath the glow of flickering garage lights. Nathaniel held his breath beside Clara behind the concrete ventilation wall, while Daniel crouched near the corner, watching the vehicle carefully. 2 men stepped out slowly wearing dark coats and gloves, their movements calm and practiced. Not rushed. Not nervous. Professionals. One of them lifted a phone toward his ear while scanning the rooftop. Clara leaned slightly closer to Nathaniel without realizing it, her shoulder brushing his arm beneath the cold rain. They expected us to panic, she whispered. That means they still need something from you. Nathaniel kept his eyes on the men near the sedan. Or someone wants me alive long enough to sign papers tomorrow morning. Daniel's jaw tightened immediately. Sir, if Owen is involved, we do not know that yet. Nathaniel interrupted quietly, though doubt already pressed heavily inside him. Clara studied the rooftop entrance again before speaking softly. There are too many people involved for this to stay quiet after tonight. One of the men near the sedan suddenly called out into the rain. Mr. Crow. The voice echoed softly across the rooftop. Calm. Polite. Somehow that made it more unsettling. This does not need to become difficult. Nathaniel almost laughed quietly under his breath. That sentence usually means the exact opposite. Clara glanced toward him briefly, and despite everything, the corner of her mouth lifted faintly again. The second man stepped forward slightly beneath the rain. We only need a conversation regarding tomorrow morning's meeting. Nathaniel stayed silent. The city lights shimmered beyond the rooftop edge while thunder rolled low over Lake Michigan. They are buying time, Clara whispered carefully. For what? Nathaniel asked softly. Before she could answer, distant sirens suddenly echoed closer through downtown streets below. Not one car. Several. The men near the sedan reacted immediately, exchanging quick glances. Daniel frowned. I did not call anyone. Clara's eyes widened slightly. Neither did I. Nathaniel slowly looked toward Daniel. Then who did? For one long second, nobody moved. Then Daniel's phone suddenly buzzed for the first time all night. Signal restored. Daniel stared at the screen in disbelief before answering immediately. Mercer. Silence. Then relief visibly hid his face. Understood. He lowered the phone slowly while rain dripped from his coat sleeves. FBI Financial Crimes Division intercepted internal Lockridge communications 30 minutes ago. The files Clara sent from the restaurant triggered an automated federal fraud alert. Nathaniel stared at him. What? Daniel nodded once. Someone inside your executive board anonymously leaked evidence tied to Argent Global and offshore payments. Clara blinked. Anonymous. Daniel looked toward her now. The files were sent from a public network near your restaurant. Nathaniel slowly turned toward Clara. Realization hit him all at once. The bartender's phone. The dead signals. The service hall computer near the freight elevator. Clara looked genuinely confused for half a second before understanding dawned across her face too. The restaurant office, she whispered. I sent your company records to myself earlier tonight when I noticed the surveillance patterns. Nathaniel stared at her. You hacked my company? Clara winced slightly. That sounds aggressive when you say it out loud. Nathaniel let out one disbelieving laugh into the ring. You are unbelievable. The men near the sedan suddenly retreated toward their vehicle as flashing lights approached the garage levels below. Within seconds, the black sedan disappeared down the ramp and vanished into the storm. Silence slowly settled across the rooftop afterward, except for rain and distant sirens fading through the city. Nathaniel leaned back against the concrete wall and closed his eyes briefly for the first time all night. Exhaustion hit him hard now that survival no longer demanded every ounce of attention. Clara watched him quietly. You okay? Nathaniel opened his eyes again and looked directly at her beneath the rooftop lights. A waitress just saved my company, exposed corruption, and possibly prevented a federal disaster. His voice softened slightly. I genuinely do not know anymore. Clara laughed quietly then, soft and tired and real. The sound warmed something deep inside Nathaniel in a way expensive restaurants and billion-dollar victories never had. Daniel stepped aside respectfully as federal vehicles entered the garage below. Agents are coming up, he said. Nathaniel nodded once, but his eyes never left Clara. Rain still shimmered across her hair and coat beneath the pale rooftop lights. She looked exhausted too now, vulnerable for the first time all night. You know, Nathaniel said quietly, this may be the strangest evening of my life. Clara folded her arms lightly against the cold wind. Most first dates do not involve federal investigations. Nathaniel smiled slowly. So you are admitting this was a date now? Clara looked down briefly, hiding another small smile. I am admitting you survived long enough to qualify for a second one. Something inside Nathaniel settled quietly then, peaceful in a way he had not felt for years. Not because the danger was over, not because the merger would survive, but because for the first time in a very long time, somebody had looked at Nathaniel Crow and seen a human being instead of a fortune. Weeks later, snow drifted softly across downtown Chicago while headlines about corruption scandals and corporate arrests filled every major news network in America. Nathaniel canceled the Lockridge merger permanently. Argent Global disappeared under federal investigation. And Clara Whitmore returned to her jazz restaurant as though none of it had happened at all. Then one snowy evening near closing time, the restaurant doors opened quietly. Nathaniel walked inside wearing a dark wool coat without security, without executives, without the armor rich men usually carry around themselves. In one hand, he held white tulips wrapped carefully against the cold. In the other sat a brand new laundry bag. Clara looked up from behind the counter in confusion. Nathaniel placed the laundry bag gently beside her coffee mug. I figured, he said softly, if this relationship is going to survive, I should probably learn how laundromats work. Clara laughed so hard she nearly dropped the menu in her hands. And for the first time since the storm began, the entire room finally felt warm again. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, share this video, and let us know where you are watching from. And please subscribe to When He Chose Her channel for more emotional billionaire and waitress stories filled with love, sacrifice, and unforgettable moments. Your support helps us create more cinematic stories every week. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story.